My parents gifted their home to my sister, although I paid their mortgage for 5 years. Later they demanded the keys to my private cabin. I refused, so they broke in and the cops were called. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Plaza Hotel cast a warm, golden glow over the reception hall, reflecting off the polished marble floors and the rims of hundreds of champagne glasses. It was the kind of wedding you only see in luxury magazines, the kind where the floral arrangements alone cost more than some people make in a year. I stood near the entrance, adjusting the strap of my dress, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. I am 32 years old, and I work as a marketing director. Beside me was my husband, Evan, a man whose patience and quiet strength had been my anchor through the chaotic storm of my family's demands. Tucked securely in the inner pocket of Evan's tailored suit jacket was a thick white envelope. Inside that envelope was a cashier's check for $10,000. That envelope was our wedding gift to my sister, Haley. She was 28, the beautiful, radiant bride of the evening, currently floating across the room in a custom designer gown, clinging to the arm of her new husband, Carter. The $10,000 was just the cherry on top. Evan and I had already paid for roughly 1/3 of the entire wedding, covering the premium open bar and the lavish 5-course catering menu. It was a staggering amount of money, a sum we had spent months saving for. But we did it because that is what families do, or at least, that is what I had always been conditioned to believe. I was the older sister, the responsible one, the one who was supposed to pave the way and make sure everything was perfect for the golden child. As Evan and I made our way toward our assigned table near the front, I spotted my parents, Diana and Douglas. My mother was fussing over the lapels of my father's tuxedo, laughing at something he said. I stopped in my tracks for a second. They looked spectacular. But it was not just their expensive clothes, it was the absolute, unfiltered joy radiating from their faces. My mother was practically glowing, her smile wide and unburdened. My father looked 10 years younger, standing tall with his chest puffed out in immense pride. A sharp, ugly twist of resentment formed in the pit of my stomach. I hated myself for feeling it, but I could not suppress the memory of my own wedding 5 years ago. When Evan and I got married, my parents were pleasant. They smiled for the photos, they ate the food, they made small talk with Evan's family. But they never looked like this. They never looked like they had just won the lottery of life. At my wedding, they seemed distracted, treating the event like a pleasant weekend obligation rather than a milestone. Tonight, however, they were bursting with an intoxicating level of pride and ecstasy. Evan noticed my hesitation. He wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. He did not need to ask what was wrong, he already knew. He knew the complicated, exhausting dynamic I had with my parents and my sister. He just gave me a reassuring squeeze, a silent promise that we would get through this night, drop off the ridiculously generous gift, and go back to our quiet, peaceful life. I forced a bright smile onto my face, pushed the dark thoughts to the back of my mind, and walked over to greet my glowing parents, completely unaware that the ground beneath my feet was about to be ripped away. To understand the sheer magnitude of what was about to happen, you have to understand the silent, suffocating financial burden I had been carrying for the past 5 years. 5 years. 60 long, grueling months. It started shortly after Evan and I returned from our own honeymoon. My father called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice trembling. His company was restructuring, and his hours had been slashed by more than half. To make matters worse, my mother's arthritis had flared up severely, forcing her to step down from her administrative job. They were drowning. The bank was threatening foreclosure on our childhood home, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in the suburbs that they had lived in for 3 decades. I did not even hesitate. I was the eldest daughter, and the guilt of seeing my parents lose their home was unbearable. I sat down with Evan at our small kitchen table, and we looked at our finances. We made a decision that would dictate our lives for the next half-decade. I took over their entire monthly mortgage payment. I paid their property taxes. I paid their homeowner's insurance. It was not easy. The financial strain was immense. I took on extra freelance marketing clients, working late into the night until my eyes burned and my vision blurred. I missed weekend trips with friends. I skipped buying new clothes. The hardest sacrifice was Evan's. He had been saving up for a vintage project car, a dream of his since college. He quietly drained that savings account to help me cover a massive spike in my parents' property taxes 3 years ago. We put our lives, our future plans, and our comfort entirely on hold so that Diana and Douglas could sleep soundly under their own roof. And what about Haley? Haley was in her early 20s at the time, working a low-stress, part-time job at an art gallery. While Evan and I were agonizing over grocery bills and utility costs, Haley was living her best life. My parents actively shielded her from their financial reality. They told me explicitly not to tell Haley about the mortgage arrangement because they did not want to stress her out. So, while I was wiring thousands of dollars a month to keep a roof over her head, Haley was posting photos on social media of her weekend getaways, her new designer handbags, and her expensive brunches. One particular memory always burned in my mind. 3 years ago, I had to sell a diamond ring I inherited from my grandmother just to cover an emergency plumbing repair at my parents' house. That exact same week, my parents bought Haley a purebred golden retriever puppy because she had been feeling a little sad after a breakup. When I questioned them about how they afforded it, my mother simply said that Haley needed a pick-me-up and that I was being overly critical. I swallowed my anger, convincing myself that I was doing the right thing for the family. I convinced myself that my sacrifices were acts of love, completely blind to the fact that I was merely an automated teller machine funding their preference for my sister. The reception was in full swing. The plates from the main course had been cleared, the champagne flutes were topped off, and the room grew quiet as the best man and the maid of honor finished their light-hearted speeches. Then, the master of ceremonies announced that the parents of the bride would like to say a few words. My father and mother walked up to the small stage, standing behind the microphone stand. The spotlight hit them, making my mother's sequin dress sparkle. My mother tapped the microphone, the sharp thud echoing through the massive hall. She smiled, looking out at the sea of faces, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We want to thank everyone for coming out tonight to celebrate our beloved daughter's wedding," she began, her voice echoing clearly. The way she emphasized the word beloved made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a subtle, maybe unintentional inflection, but it felt like a tiny needle to my pride. Evan shifted in his seat next to me, his knee brushing against mine. My father leaned into the microphone. "Watching Haley grow into the stunning, brilliant woman she is today has been the absolute greatest joy of our entire lives. She has always been our special girl, always bringing so much light and laughter into our home." I nodded along, taking a sip of my water. I told myself to stop being bitter. Of course they loved her. It was her wedding day. People always exaggerate how wonderful the bride is on her wedding day. Then, my mother reached into her designer purse, a purse I knew for a fact she could only afford because she did not have a housing payment. She pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was not a card. It looked like a legal document. "Haley Carter," my mother said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Your father and I wanted to give you something to help you start your new life together. Something meaningful. Something to build your future on." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of folded papers, holding them up for the entire room to see. "We have officially transferred the deed. We are giving you our family home as your wedding present." The room erupted. Gasps of shock rippled through the tables, immediately followed by thunderous, deafening applause and cheering. People were wiping away tears, whispering about how generous, how incredibly beautiful the gesture was. I stopped breathing. The air was violently sucked out of my lungs. Beside me, Evan went completely rigid, his body turning into stone. I stared at my parents on the stage. I stared at the papers in my mother's hand. I waited for the punchline. I waited for my father to laugh and say it was a joke. But they were beaming, basking in the adoration of the crowd. I looked at Haley. She was sitting at the sweetheart table with Carter. Carter looked genuinely shocked, his jaw literally hanging open. But Haley? Haley did not look surprised at all. She was crying those perfect, delicate, happy tears, covering her mouth with her hands, but her eyes held zero shock. She knew. She had known all along. The house. My parents' house. The 4-bedroom colonial house with the massive mortgage. The mortgage that I had been paying for the last 5 years. The house that I had sacrificed my sanity, my free time, and my husband's savings to save from the bank. They had secretly signed the deed over to my sister without saying a single word to me. I was paying for a house that now belonged entirely to Haley. I managed to plaster a sickeningly fake smile onto my face as the room gave them a standing ovation. Inside, my mind was screaming so loudly I thought the person next to me could hear it. Not once. Not a single time had they consulted me. I was the sole reason they even had a house to give away. Caroline, Evan whispered, his voice dangerously low, practically vibrating with suppressed rage. Are you okay? Fine, I said through gritted teeth, my jaw locked so tight it ached. I am absolutely fine. I kept smiling as Haley and Carter rushed the stage to embrace my parents in a sickeningly sweet family hug. We lasted exactly 45 more minutes. I sat through the cake cutting like a hollow mannequin. I clapped when everyone else clapped. I smiled when the photographer aimed his lens at our table. But the moment the DJ started playing loud dance music and the older guests began filtering out, I turned to Evan. Get the car, I whispered, my voice sounding completely foreign to my own ears. I need to leave right now, or I am going to scream and tear those curtains down. Evan did not hesitate. He stood up, grabbed my shawl, and guided me toward the exit. We bumped into one of the bridesmaids near the coat check. I mechanically recited an excuse about Evan having an early morning conference call, congratulated her on a beautiful ceremony, and practically sprinted out the grand double doors into the cool night air. The second the heavy doors of Evan's car slammed shut, sealing us inside the quiet cabin, the dam broke. I did not just cry, I sobbed. Deep, ugly, chest-heaving sobs that left me gasping for breath. The kind of crying that hurts your ribs. Evan started the engine and merged onto the dark highway. The drive back to our apartment would take 45 minutes, and for the first 20, the only sound in the car was my weeping. I cannot believe they did that, I choked out, wiping my mascara-stained cheeks with the back of my hand. I have been paying that mortgage every single month for 5 years. 5 years, Evan. And they just gave it to her. They gave her the house I bought. I know, Evan said, his grip on the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were bone white. It is unbelievable, Caroline. It is completely insane. She knew, I said, my voice rising with a mix of fury and devastation. Did you see Haley's face? She wasn't surprised. Carter was floored, but she knew. They planned this behind my back. Of course she knew, Evan replied grimly. This was calculated. They wanted the big, dramatic reveal in front of 200 people so they could look like the perfect, wealthy, generous parents. They used your money to buy their golden child a house. The streetlights flickered over us as we drove. The anger began to replace the sorrow. I told Evan that it was not even about the financial value of the house, though that was staggering. It was the profound, suffocating disrespect. They had treated me like a silent investor who had no rights, no voice, and no feelings. By the time Evan parked the car in our apartment building's garage, I was utterly drained. We walked upstairs in silence, the $10,000 wedding check still sitting in Evan's jacket pocket. We never put it in the card box. We never would. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a heavy, aching chest. I picked up my phone, expecting to see a missed call, a text, a pathetic excuse, anything. There was nothing. Just an automated email from a clothing store. My parents had not even bothered to text and ask if we made it home safely after leaving the reception early. That silence marked the beginning of a 3-week ghosting period. I made a conscious, ironclad decision not to reach out first. I was not going to demand an explanation. I wanted to see how long it would take for them to remember I existed when they did not immediately need a bill paid. I canceled the automatic bank transfer for the mortgage. That was the first thing I did on Monday morning. I logged into my banking portal, found the recurring payment titled Parents' Home Loan, and clicked delete. The satisfaction was microscopic compared to the betrayal, but it was a start. Let Haley pay for her own house now. Those 3 weeks were a psychological torture chamber. I went to the office, sat in marketing meetings, reviewed campaign analytics, and pretended my world had not tilted off its axis. But every time my phone vibrated, my heart would pound, thinking it was my mother finally calling to apologize, finally calling to explain that they had a plan to pay me back, or that it was a misunderstanding. But it was always just a coworker or a calendar alert. Evan was my rock. He cooked dinner, he listened to me vent the exact same frustrations every night, and he never once made me feel crazy for agonizing over it. He reminded me constantly that their behavior was toxic and that I was grieving the illusion of the parents I thought I had. I realized during those 3 weeks that I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy their love and approval. I thought that by being the responsible one, by saving them from financial ruin, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Haley. But you cannot buy genuine affection. To them, I was a utility. I was the electricity, the running water, the mortgage payment. Essential, but completely ignored until something breaks. Haley was the artwork on the walls. By the end of the 3rd week, the lingering sadness had completely calcified into a hard, cold layer of pure anger. I was done crying. I was done hoping for a loving family. I was just angry. It happened on a Thursday evening. I was sitting on the couch, laptop resting on my knees, when my phone rang. The screen illuminated with a picture of my mother, Diana. I stared at it for a long time. It rang 4 times before I finally swiped the screen to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "Caroline, honey," my mother chirped. Her voice was painfully bright, dripping with a sugary sweetness that made my stomach churn. "How are you? We haven't heard from you since the wedding. We were starting to think you forgot about us." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her statement left me speechless for a few seconds. She was gaslighting me right out of the gate, making it seem like I was the one who had been neglectful by not calling them after they gave away the house I was paying for. "I have been busy," I replied coldly. "Well, you work too hard, you always do," she continued, completely ignoring my tone. "Listen, sweetheart. Haley and Carter just got back from their honeymoon in Hawaii yesterday. They brought back all these wonderful photos and souvenirs. We are having a big family dinner this Saturday to welcome them back, and we would absolutely love for you and Evan to come over. It feels like forever since we all sat down together." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her through the phone if Haley was going to serve the dinner on the deed of the house I bought. I wanted to demand how she could sleep at night. But then a dark, cynical curiosity took over. I wanted to look them in the eye. I wanted to see how far they were willing to take this charade. I wanted to watch them sit in that house, knowing I had stopped the mortgage payments, and see what their next move was. "A family dinner," I repeated slowly. "At your house?" "Well, technically it is Haley's house now," Diana laughed, a light, airy sound that made me want to throw my phone against the wall. "But yes, at the old house. Saturday at 6. Please say you will come." I looked over at Evan, who was watching me closely from the kitchen counter. I met his eyes, and he raised an eyebrow in question. "Fine," I said smoothly. "Evan and I will be there on Saturday." "Oh, wonderful. I am making my famous pot roast. See you then, honey. Love you." She hung up before I could reply. I slowly lowered the phone. Evan walked over and handed me a glass of wine. "They invited us to dinner," I told him, taking a long sip, "to celebrate the newlyweds coming back from Hawaii. In the house they gave her." Evan let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Are you seriously going to go?" "Yes," I said, and for the first time in nearly a month, I felt a strange sense of calm. "I am going. Because I want to watch the exact moment they realize I canceled the bank transfer. And I want to see how much more disrespectful they can possibly be. If only I knew that giving away the house was just the beginning of their plan." Thank you so much for watching. If you are enjoying the story so far, please take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below with the name of the city you are living in. Every single comment helps the video reach more viewers, and I appreciate you very much. Saturday arrived with a gloomy, overcast sky, perfectly matching my mood. Evan and I drove the familiar 30-minute route from our apartment to the suburbs. As we pulled onto my parents', no, Haley's street, I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest, but I forced it down, replacing it with the cold armor I had built over the last 3 weeks. We parked in the driveway behind Carter's shiny new SUV. We walked up the front steps and, out of habit, I reached into my purse for my spare key. I stopped. It felt wrong to use it now. It was not my family home anymore. I pressed the doorbell instead. Diana opened the door, wearing a pristine floral apron and a smile so wide it looked painful. "Caroline." "Evan." Come in, come in." She threw her arms around me, hugging me tightly. I stood rigidly, lightly patting her back before pulling away. She acted as if the last month had never happened. She acted as if she had not committed a massive financial betrayal against her own flesh and blood. "It smells great in here, Diana," Evan said politely, though his eyes were sharp and guarded. "Oh, thank you, Evan." "Go on into the dining room. Everyone is in there." She ushered us inside, bustling back toward the kitchen. We walked through the hallway and stepped into the formal dining room. I stopped dead in my tracks. There was Haley, my 28-year-old sister, standing on a stepladder. She was aggressively yanking down the heavy, vintage blue curtains that our mother had cherished for 15 years. In their place, she was hanging brand new, ridiculously expensive-looking cream silk drapes. Carter was standing at the bottom of the ladder, holding a drill and looking thoroughly bored. My blood instantly boiled. It had been barely a month since the wedding, and she was already tearing the place apart, marking her territory like a queen claiming her newly conquered castle. A castle I had funded. "Oh, hey guys." Haley chirped from the top of the ladder, dropping the old blue curtains onto the hardwood floor like trash. "Just doing a little redecorating." The blue was so incredibly dated, do you not think? I wanted something that brings in more natural light. I stared at the pile of blue fabric on the floor. "You certainly wasted no time making yourself at home, Haley." Haley climbed down the ladder, dusting off her hands, completely oblivious to the venom in my voice. "Well, it is our home now, Caroline. Carter and I want to modernize the whole first floor. We are thinking about knocking down the wall between the kitchen and the living room next month to make it an open concept." I looked at Evan. He tightened his jaw. Remodeling. She was planning to remodel a house, while I had spent 5 years wearing shoes with holes in the soles so the bank would not foreclose on it. Before I could say something that would burn the house down early, Douglas walked into the room carrying a tray of drinks. He gave Evan a firm handshake and patted me on the shoulder. "Glad you could make it, kiddo," my father said, refusing to meet my eyes for more than a split second. He knew. Deep down, he knew what they had done was unforgivable, but he was too much of a coward to address it. "Dinner is ready," Diana sang out from the doorway. "Everyone take a seat." We sat down. The table was beautifully set. The pot roast looked perfect. But as I looked around the table at my family, I realized I felt absolutely nothing for them anymore. The love had been completely drained out of me, replaced by a morbid fascination with how this train wreck of a dinner was going to unfold. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the most audacious script I had ever heard was about to be read aloud. The first 20 minutes of the dinner were an absolute masterclass in tone-deaf bragging. Haley and Carter dominated the conversation entirely, leaning over their plates of pot roast and mashed potatoes to excitedly describe every single luxurious detail of their 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii. Haley talked about the private helicopter tour over the volcanic craters, throwing her hands up to emphasize how breathtaking the views were. She detailed the 5-star resort they stayed at, specifically mentioning the private infinity pool attached to their suite and the expensive champagne waiting for them upon arrival. Carter chimed in to describe the deep-sea fishing charter they booked, casually mentioning how much it cost to ship a massive fish back to the mainland. I sat there, cutting my meat into tiny, perfectly square pieces, chewing slowly, and saying absolutely nothing. Evan sat beside me, offering polite, non-committal nods and an occasional hum of acknowledgement, but under the table, his hand was resting firmly on my thigh, keeping me grounded. As I listened to my sister talk about spending hundreds of dollars on a single dinner by the beach, my mind involuntarily started doing the math. I calculated the cost of their flights, the luxury resort, the helicopter tours, and the fine dining. The total amount easily surpassed what Evan and I had spent paying their mortgage for an entire year. They were sitting there, happily throwing away money, fully empowered by the fact that they now owned a massive piece of real estate completely debt-free. Well, debt-free for them. They had a house because I had bled my own bank accounts dry for 60 months. Diana and Douglas hung onto every word Haley said, laughing at her jokes and asking follow-up questions about the tropical cocktails and the beach weather. But as the stories began to wind down and the plates were mostly cleared, I noticed a distinct shift in the atmosphere. The easy, flowing conversation suddenly hit a wall. Diana glanced nervously at Douglas across the table. Douglas cleared his throat, suddenly finding his half-empty water glass incredibly fascinating. The fake smiles tightened. The room grew uncomfortably quiet, save for the clinking of silverware against porcelain. They were preparing to drop the other shoe. I could feel it in my bones. You do not survive 3 decades in a highly manipulative family dynamic without developing a sixth sense for when you are about to be cornered. I set my fork and knife down on my plate, crossing my arms over my chest, and waited. I looked directly at my mother, maintaining unbroken eye contact, silently daring her to speak. Diana dabbed the corners of her mouth with a cloth napkin, letting out a heavy, manufactured sigh. Well, she started, her voice dropping an octave to sound more serious and maternal. Now that the wedding is over and the kids are back from their beautiful trip, your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future. Is that so? I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. Yes, my father chimed in, leaning forward on his elbows. As you know, Caroline, this house is a bit too much for just the two of us now. And since we gave it to Haley and Carter to start their family, it really does not make sense for us to stay here. A young married couple needs their privacy. They need their own space to grow without their parents hovering over them in the hallway. We completely agree, Haley said, nodding emphatically as she reached over to squeeze Carter's hand. It is just time for a new chapter. Carter and I really want to make this place our own, and it is hard to do that when Mom and Dad are still occupying the master bedroom. I looked back and forth between them. I understand. So, where are you two planning to go? Have you started looking at smaller apartments in the area? There are some nice condo complexes over by the river. Diana offered a dismissive wave of her hand, chuckling lightly as if I had just suggested something utterly ridiculous. Oh, heavens no, Caroline. We are not going to rent an apartment at our age. Throwing money away on rent is a terrible financial decision. The irony of that statement was so profound it physically hurt. We actually already have a plan all figured out, Diana continued, her smile returning, bright and confident. We have decided that we are going to move into your vacation cabin. The dining room fell dead silent. Even Evan, who usually maintained a perfect poker face, physically recoiled, staring at my mother as if she had suddenly grown a second head. Excuse me, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Your cabin, honey, Diana repeated, speaking slowly as if explaining a simple concept to a toddler. The one up near the lake. It is the perfect size for your father and me. It is on one level, so it will be wonderful for my arthritis, and it is so peaceful out there in the woods. We figured we would pack up our things this week and head up there by Sunday. We can just take your spare keys before you leave tonight. I stared at her, my mind racing to process the sheer, unadulterated audacity of what she had just declared. She did not ask. She did not propose an idea. She announced it as a decided fact. For context, the vacation cabin she was referring to was my sanctuary. It was a beautiful, 2-bedroom timber house located exactly 2 hours north of the city, nestled deep in the mountains. I bought it entirely with my own money 7 years ago, long before I even met Evan. I had worked insane overtime hours in my 20s, saving every single penny, eating instant noodles, and skipping vacations just to afford the down payment. It was my private retreat, the one place in the world where I could go to escape the noise and pressure of my life. And now my parents, who had just secretly gifted away the 4-bedroom house I had been financially keeping afloat for 5 long years, were demanding the keys to my completely paid-off private property so they could live there rent-free. The shock quickly evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, white-hot adrenaline. I uncrossed my arms and leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the dining table. "Let me make sure I am understanding this correctly," I said, my voice dangerously calm, slicing through the heavy silence in the room. "You secretly gifted this massive house to Haley for her wedding. You transferred the deed without telling me. And now, because you made yourselves completely homeless to give Haley a free house, you have decided you are simply going to move into my private cabin. Without asking me." "Caroline, there is no need to use that tone," Douglas said, his face flushing red. "We are family. Families help each other out. You barely even use that cabin during the winter anyway. It is just sitting there empty. It is the most logical solution." "Logical for who?" I fired back, my voice rising. I turned my glare toward Haley, who was suddenly looking very defensive. "Did you know about this, Haley? Was this part of your little master plan? You get the big suburban house, and Mom and Dad get to hijack my property." "Do not act like a crazy person, Caroline," Haley snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "You are being incredibly selfish and greedy right now. You have a great job, Evan makes good money, and you have 2 properties. Why are you hoarding a whole house when Mom and Dad need a place to live? You have always been so jealous of me, and now you are just trying to punish our parents because they gave me a wedding gift." "A wedding gift?" I let out a sharp, bitter laugh that echoed off the dining room walls. I looked directly at Carter, who was shrinking back into his chair. "Carter, did Haley happen to tell you how your new in-laws managed to keep this house out of foreclosure for the last 5 years? Did she mention how they magically afforded those property taxes?" Carter looked confused, glancing at Haley. "What do you mean?" "Caroline, stop it right now," Diana hissed, her face draining of color. "This is family business. Do not ruin this dinner." "No, let us talk about family business," I demanded, standing up from my chair. "For 5 years, Carter. 60 months. I have paid the entire mortgage on this house. I paid the insurance. I paid the taxes. Evan and I drained our savings and worked ourselves half to death so the bank would not throw Diana and Douglas onto the street. And while I was doing that, they were buying Haley designer dogs and funding her vacations. Then, they took the house that I paid for, and they gave it to her." Haley's jaw dropped. She looked at our parents, panic flashing in her eyes. She knew I helped, but I realized in that moment she never knew the full extent. She never knew I paid the whole thing. "And now," I continued, turning my fury back to my parents, "you want my cabin. You want to take my safe haven because you gave everything away to your golden child. Well, here is my logical solution. Haley loves you so much. You love Haley so much. This is a huge 4-bedroom house. You can live right here with her. Carter and Haley can take the master suite, and you can take the guest rooms. Problem solved." "That is not fair," Haley shrieked. "We are newlyweds. We need our privacy." "And I need my sanity," I replied coldly. "The answer is no. You are not moving into my cabin. Not this Sunday, not next month, not ever." The dining room erupted into absolute chaos. Diana burst into loud, theatrical tears, burying her face in her hands. Douglas stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. "How dare you speak to us like this?" he bellowed. "We raised you. We gave you life, we put food on your table, we paid for your braces, and this is how you repay us? By throwing us out onto the street." "You threw yourselves onto the street," I yelled back, refusing to back down. "You made a financial decision without consulting the person funding your life. You made your bed, now you get to sleep in it. Maybe Haley can set up a nice cot for you in the basement. You are a monster," Haley screamed, actually stamping her foot like a spoiled child. "You are a cold, heartless monster." "We are leaving," Evan said. His voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that instantly cut through the screaming. He stood up, towering over the table, and placed a protective hand on the small of my back. He looked directly at Douglas. "Do not ever point your finger at my wife again. Do not ever ask her for another dime. We are done." Without waiting for another word, Evan guided me out of the dining room. I did not look back. We walked down the hallway, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind us, silencing the screaming inside. The drive home was a blur. The adrenaline crash hit me hard, leaving my hands shaking and my chest tight. But beneath the anxiety, I felt something else. A tiny, fragile spark of absolute liberation. I had finally said no. I had finally cut the strings. The next morning, my phone was a war zone. I woke up to 27 missed calls and dozens of text messages. Some were from Diana, sending long, rambling paragraphs about how heartbroken she was, how she could not stop crying, and how she never thought she would raise such an ungrateful daughter. Some were from Douglas, demanding that I call them immediately to apologize and hand over the cabin keys. The worst were from Haley, calling me every vile name in the book, accusing me of trying to ruin her marriage by trying to force our parents to live with her. I sat on the edge of my bed, reading them with a strange sense of detachment. I did not cry. I did not feel guilty. I just felt exhausted. I showed the messages to Evan as he brought me a cup of coffee. He read through them, shaking his head in disgust. "Block them," Evan said simply. "All of them. Phone numbers, social media, email. Cut the poison out, Caroline. You do not deserve to read this garbage." "You are right," I agreed. It took less than 2 minutes. With a few taps on my screen, I blocked my mother, my father, and my sister across every single platform. I set my phone down, took a sip of my coffee, and looked out the window. For the first time in 5 years, I was not financially responsible for anyone but myself and my husband. I thought it was over. I thought blocking them was the end of the story. I vastly underestimated their sense of entitlement. 2 full weeks passed in blissful, uninterrupted silence. Evan and I fell back into our normal routine. Without the crushing weight of a second mortgage payment looming over our heads, we actually started talking about the future again. We looked at brochures for a trip to Europe, something we had delayed for years. The heavy cloud of anxiety that had followed me around for half a decade was finally beginning to lift. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk in the marketing firm, reviewing a campaign proposal for a new client, when my cell phone vibrated violently against the wood surface. A loud, piercing alarm tone blared from the speaker, causing my coworkers in the adjacent cubicles to jump. I grabbed the phone. The screen was flashing bright red. It was a push notification from my smart home security application. Alert. Motion detected at vacation cabin. Front door opened. My heart dropped into my stomach. I opened the application quickly. The digital log showed that the heavy front door had been unlocked using a physical backup key, but the digital disarm pin had not been entered on the keypad inside. The alarm system was armed, the sirens at the cabin were likely screaming, and the cameras were rolling. Before I could even click on the live camera feed, a phone call came through from an unknown number. I answered immediately. "This is the Safeguard Security Monitoring Center," a stern, professional voice said. "Am I speaking with Caroline?" "Yes, this is Caroline." "Ma'am, we have received a perimeter breach alert at your mountain property. The front door was opened, but the system was not disarmed." "Are you currently at the location?" "No," I said, my voice rising in panic. "I am 2 hours away in the city. No one is supposed to be there. No one has permission to be on that property." "Understood," the operator replied calmly. "We are dispatching the local county police to the address immediately to investigate a potential break-in. Please remain on standby and do not travel to the property alone." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking violently. There was only one other physical key to that cabin in existence. I had given it to my parents 3 years ago for absolute emergencies, in case something happened to me or Evan. I had completely forgotten they even had it. I threw my laptop into my bag, ran out of the office, and called Evan on the way to the parking garage. I quickly explained the situation. He told me to swing by his office building, which was on the way to the highway. 10 minutes later, Evan jumped into the passenger seat of my car, and we tore out of the city, merging onto the northbound interstate. The 2-hour drive was agonizing. We alternated between driving in tense silence and angrily theorizing about what we were going to find. I was furious. I had explicitly looked them in the eye and told them no. I had blocked their numbers. I had cut them off. And their response was to literally pack their bags, drive up a mountain, and attempt to secretly move into my house behind my back. They genuinely believed that if they just got inside and set up their furniture, I would not have the heart to kick them out. They thought they could force my hand. By the time we navigated the winding mountain roads and approached my property line, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows through the pine trees. We turned onto the gravel driveway of my property, the tires crunching loudly. My stomach clenched. Parked right in front of the cabin porch was my father's old silver sedan. Directly behind it, with its red and blue emergency lights flashing brightly against the timber walls, was a county police cruiser. Evan threw the car into park, and we both practically jumped out. The scene on the front porch was pathetic, infuriating, and entirely of their own making. Diana and Douglas were sitting on a pile of expensive suitcases and cardboard boxes. Douglas had his head in his hands. Diana looked furious, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Standing over them was a tall, broad-shouldered police officer holding a notepad. The heavy front door of the cabin was standing wide open, the security siren having been disabled by the police, but the lock cylinder was visibly scratched. They had struggled to get in. "Officer," I called out, walking quickly up the pathway. "I am Caroline. I am the homeowner. I am the one the security company called." The officer turned, nodding respectfully. "Officer Bradley, ma'am. Glad you could make it. We found these 2 individuals attempting to move belongings into the residence. The alarm was triggered. They claimed to be your parents and stated they had your permission to move in today." Diana stood up immediately, her face twisted in rage. "Tell him, Caroline. Tell him this is a huge misunderstanding. We have a key. We are your parents, for heaven's sake. Tell him to let us go inside so we can unpack." I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at the woman who had birthed me, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, hard disdain. "They're my parents," I said to Officer Bradley, my voice steady and loud enough for them to hear clearly. "But they absolutely do not have permission to be here. I explicitly denied them entry to this property 2 weeks ago. They used an old emergency key to bypass the lock against my direct orders." Douglas stood up, looking panicked. "Caroline, please. You cannot do this. We have nowhere else to go. The lease on our temporary rental is up, and Haley will not return our calls. We drove all the way up here. Just let us stay for 1 month. Just 1 month." "No," I said flatly. Diana lost her mind. She lunged forward against the porch railing, screaming at me. "You vicious, ungrateful brat. We are homeless because of you. You are throwing your own elderly parents out into the cold. I will never forgive you for this. You are homeless because you gave a perfectly good house to your youngest daughter," Evan interrupted, stepping forward to shield me. "Do not blame your terrible choices on my wife." Officer Bradley held up a hand, silencing my mother. He turned back to me. "Ma'am, since they did use a key they had in their possession, it makes pressing felony breaking and entering charges difficult. However, since you explicitly denied them permission, this is a textbook case of criminal trespassing. How do you want to proceed? I can order them to leave the premises immediately, or I can take them down to the station for formal processing and issue a strict trespassing warning." I looked at my parents. They looked terrified now. The reality of the law was finally overriding their entitlement. "Take them to the station," I said firmly. "Process them. I want it on the official record that they are not allowed within 500 feet of my property." Diana gasped, covering her mouth. Douglas looked like he was going to be sick. Officer Bradley nodded, instructed them to leave their boxes on the porch, and escorted my weeping parents into the back of the police cruiser. Evan and I stood on the driveway, watching the red and blue lights disappear down the mountain road. We called an emergency locksmith right then and there, waited for all the locks to be changed, and drove back to the city in the dark. I knew the explosion was coming. You do not send narcissistic parents to a police station in the back of a cruiser without them launching a retaliatory strike. It took exactly 1 week for Diana to construct her narrative and drop the bomb on the internet. I found out when my phone started buzzing frantically with notifications on a Saturday morning. I opened Facebook to find a massive, multi-paragraph post from my mother. She had tagged dozens of family members, aunts, uncles, and family friends. The post was a masterpiece of victimhood. It began with a dramatic quote about the pain of being abandoned by your own flesh and blood. She spun a horrific tale, claiming that in their golden years, after hitting financial hardship, their eldest daughter had cruelly cast them aside. She wrote that I had maliciously called the police on them simply for wanting to visit my cabin, leaving them humiliated and wandering the streets without a roof over their heads. The comments were a bloodbath. Relatives I had not spoken to in years were leaving aggressive comments, calling me a sociopath, a heartless monster, and an ungrateful child. My aunt wrote that she was disgusted to share the same bloodline as me. I sat on the couch, staring at the screen. A few months ago, this public shaming would have broken me. I would have called them crying, begging for forgiveness just to stop the embarrassment. But today I felt like a general going into battle with an arsenal of absolute truth. I opened a new post on my own profile. I did not write with emotion. I wrote with cold, hard facts. Since my mother has decided to make our private family matters public, I feel it is only fair that everyone gets the entire context. Here are the facts that were conveniently left out of her tragic story. Fact 1. For the past 5 years, my husband and I paid 100% of my parents' mortgage, property taxes, and insurance. We drained our own savings to prevent their home from being foreclosed on by the bank. Fact 2. 3 weeks ago, without consulting me, my parents legally transferred the deed of that exact home to my sister as a wedding gift. They gave away the house I was paying for. Fact 3. After giving away their home, they demanded to take over my private, fully paid vacation cabin. When I said no, they drove 2 hours, used an emergency key to enter my property without permission, and triggered my security alarm. The police removed them for trespassing. If my parents need a place to live, I suggest they contact my sister, who currently resides in a 4-bedroom house that I funded. I will not be bullied or manipulated any longer. I hit publish and tagged every single relative who had commented on my mother's post. The whiplash was instantaneous. Within 20 minutes, the tone in the comment section violently reversed. Relatives began demanding answers from Diana. My aunt deleted her comment and sent me a private message apologizing profusely. People were outraged about the secret deed transfer. Diana attempted to delete my comments, but it was too late. The truth was out, and her perfect victim image was completely shattered. The final piece of the puzzle, the absolute peak of poetic justice, fell into place a few days later. I was making dinner when my phone rang. It was Cassidy, my cousin on my father's side, who always loved family gossip. "Caroline, you will not believe what just happened," Cassidy said, her voice breathless with excitement. "Tell me," I replied, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. "So, after your Facebook post exposed everything, the family basically completely turned on your parents. Nobody would offer them a place to stay because everyone thinks what they did to you is vile. So, desperate and out of options, your parents packed up their car and drove to Haley's house. The house they gave her." I stopped stirring. And Cassidy laughed, a sharp, vindictive sound. "Haley refused to let them move in. She literally kept the chain lock on the front door. She told them that Carter was furious about the family drama, that they needed their privacy to focus on their marriage, and that having her parents living in the guest room would completely ruin her newlywed aesthetic." I leaned against the kitchen counter, letting out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "She turned them away. Slammed the door in their faces," Cassidy confirmed. "After they gave her a free house. I heard from Aunt Martha that your parents had to sign a lease on a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. And get this, because they do not have you paying their bills anymore, your mother had to go back to work. She took a full-time job as a receptionist at a dental office just to cover their rent. I thanked Cassidy for the update and hung up the phone. I stood in my quiet, peaceful kitchen, listening to the soft bubbling of the sauce on the stove. The irony was perfect. They had sacrificed their eldest daughter, their financial stability, and their dignity, all to win the favor of their golden child. And the moment they became a burden to her, the moment they could no longer offer her anything of value, she discarded them like yesterday's trash. They were currently sitting in a cheap rental apartment, working full-time in their late 50s, realizing that the daughter they worshipped did not actually love them at all. She only loved what they could give her. Evan walked into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. "Who was on the phone?" he asked softly. "Cassidy," I smiled, leaning back into his embrace. "Haley kicked my parents out. They are renting an apartment, and Diana is back to working full-time." Evan let out a low whistle. "Karma never misses an address, does it?" "No," I agreed, turning to kiss his cheek. "It really does not." That weekend, I drove up to the cabin. I did not go to relax. I went to take photographs. I cleaned the place top to bottom, made the beds with fresh linens, and listed the property on a short-term vacation rental website. Within 3 days, it was fully booked for the entire summer. The extra income from the rental was fantastic, but the real prize was the absolute silence from my family. The heavy chains of obligation, guilt, and emotional manipulation had finally been broken. I was free. They gave away the house I paid for, tried to take my only sanctuary, and now they are paying the price for trusting their golden child. But a small part of me still wonders, am I wrong for walking away and letting them face the consequences alone? Or should I have tried to be the bigger person and forgiven them? Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next story.